Oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président, quand le Premier ministre a dépensé 4 000...
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spent $4.5 billion of taxpayers' money, and he said it was to guarantee that construction would start this summer. He failed. The project has been on hold for over 3 weeks, and Canadians have no idea what the Liberals plan to do. Can the Prime Minister tell the thousands of Canadians who depend on the jobs to build the pipeline when they'll be able to go back to work? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the outset, what I said to Canadians was that I understood that the environment and the economy go hand in hand. That's why, when we took government, we invested in environmental protection. We worked in partnership with Indigenous peoples to create economic growth in the right way in this country. That is exactly what we're going to continue to do. The Conservatives, for their part, want us to minimize environmental protection and set aside Indigenous peoples. That is not what we're going to do. We are going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, more to this past summer as the Prime Minister's summer of failure. And the judge that ruled on the Trans Mountain case agrees. That judge said that, quote, Canada failed in Phase 3 to engage in dialogue meaningfully. How can the Prime Minister mismanage this pipeline project so terribly, Mr. Speaker?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in 2012, the Conservative government limited the scope of the National Energy Board in terms of its analysing the impacts on marine ecosystems. That's why we have moved forward, in any case, with the Oceans Protection Plan to look carefully at how we can protect the southern resident killer whale pod, how we can make sure that we are protecting our oceans from spills and accidents. That's something that's important to British Columbians, Mr. Speaker, but it's important to all Canadians. That's why we're moving forward in a responsible way that protects the environment and that works with Indigenous peoples as we look to get the right projects built for Canada.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister just keeps saying things that he knows aren't true. The previous Conservative government got 4 major pipeline projects built. We succeeded where he is failing. And one of those, Mr. Speaker, the Kinder Morgan Anchor Loop, opened up Asian markets by getting Canada's resources to Tidewater. But it was his execution of the process that failed.
Right.
Again, is this just part of a plan to phase out Canada's energy sector?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what the Conservatives haven't understood, even with the drubbing they got in the 2015 election, is the only way to build a strong economy is to protect the environment at the same time and work with Indigenous peoples in a respectful way. That's what they failed to do, and that's why we're moving forward in the way that Canadians expect, doing stronger science, working in partnership with Indigenous peoples, and showing the highest growth in the G7 last year after they had the lowest growth rates since R.B. Bennett.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the record on this is clear. The Conservative Party got the job done. We succeeded where he is failing. We had, through a rigorous approvals process, got 4 major pipeline projects approved and completed. It was this Prime Minister whose tough negotiating skills sent $4.5 billion to Houston investors, overpaying by almost $2 billion. That's the kind of negotiating savvy that this Prime Minister has. So my question is, just how fast did those Houston investors sign on to that deal?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I seem to be understanding that at this point the Conservative Party of Canada doesn't want the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion because that's what they would get. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, when we took ownership of that pipeline expansion project, we prevented it from being dead in the water. We know that moving forward in the right way on projects projects like these is what Canadians expect. Their failure to get our resources to new markets other than the United States is exactly what grew Canadians tired of this government, among many other things.
We'll have some order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, they've bought it without building it. We will build it without having to buy it. That's the difference between our two parties, Mr. Speaker. If they really wanted to develop Canada's energy sector and get our resources to market, they will invite Energy East back to the table. They will scrap the carbon tax, and they will scrap their plans for C69, the ban on pipeline bill. Will the Prime Minister do any of those things to get our men and women in this country back to work?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives seem full of vim and vigor in what they want to talk about, but they don't actually have any plans. The closest we've seen to it is, well, you should bring in legislation to get that pipeline built. The fact that we would expect the private sector and investors to move forward on projects in Canada, knowing that any time you want to get something built, you have to work legislation on it through this House of Commons, is not the kind of predictable, clear path that our investors from around the world or in Canada want. We're going to get clarity to be able to build things responsibly.
L'honorable député de Rimouski-Nejet.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-les-Basques.
Mr. Speaker, dairy farmers are worried. In Manitoba, David and his brother are third-generation dairy farmers who are committed to providing the highest quality milk to Canadians. But with each trade deal, Canadian dairy farmers like them are asked by Liberal and Conservative governments to give away a little bit and a little bit more. Basically, they are being asked to accept a death by 1,000 cuts. Right. Enough is enough. When will the Prime Minister do as he promised and commit to fully protect supply management?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have and are committed to protecting supply management. Supply management is a system that works for our farmers and for consumers. It was a Liberal government that brought it in 40 years ago. We understand how important it is to continue to protect our agricultural industry and our dairy producers. We continue to sign important trade deals around the world and make sure that we are protecting our supply managed industry and indeed our family dairy farms because that's what Canadians expect.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-les-Basques.
Still refuses to say it. Plusieurs producteurs laitiers.
Many dairy producers from Canada are on the Hill today, and they're concerned and worried that the government is using them as bargaining chips for NAFTA negotiations. When I meet with dairy producers in my riding, they say it's because the supply management system enables them to have stability in the costs of production that their farms can exist. The government is sacrificing them each time it has an opportunity. Some concessions, more concessions, and yet more concessions, and the system is getting weaker. Can the Prime Minister stand today and tell dairy producers directly that he will fully protect supply management? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, what people clearly see is that the NDP is unable to support trade agreements. They don't know that trade agreements are good for the economy and for workers. Once again, I want to underscore our support for dairy producers and for supply management. I salute to the dairy producers who have traveled to Ottawa today to be heard with respect to their concerns. We are listening to their concerns, and we will continue to protect supply management. I thank them for the work that they do and for their presence in Ottawa today. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Our dairy producers, Mr. Speaker, have been directly attacked by Trump, and the Liberals have implied that they were flexible. Ms. Chevalier, a farmer from Saint-Ignace de Loyola, is afraid that new concessions in the supply management system are going to occur. After having abandoned producers under CETA and the CPTPP, how can Ms. Chevalier trust the Liberal government, trust that it will, in fact, protect supply management? Mr. Speaker, We know full well that the U.S. administration has targeted our supply management system, but Canadians know as well that on several occasions I have reiterated that we will protect supply management because it helps our farmers, our dairy producers, consumers to be sure about what they're buying. In terms of dairy, we will continue to defend the supply management system and the excellent work being done by dairy producers across the country.
Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I heard from Dave Taylor from Vancouver Island, who knows how important supply management is for his family farm and locally produced high-quality dairy products. Now, Liberals claim to agree with Dave, but two sources with direct knowledge of NAFTA negotiations said Canada is ready to make concessions in our dairy market. The Dairy Farmers of Canada, representing nearly 12,000 family farms, are watching this government. Will the Prime Minister promise here and now that his government will make no concessions to our dairy market, yes or no?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, I will not be negotiating in public, but what I will reassure Canadians, as I have throughout this summer and throughout this past year, we will not sign a bad deal for Canada or for Canadians. I know Conservatives are worried that we need to sign a deal even if it's a bad deal. We will not be doing that. We will be ensuring that whatever deal we move forward with is the right one for Canadians, and if there is not a good deal on the table, we will not sign.
The Honourable Member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, on May 3rd, 2010, the following was said in this House: providing opportunities for buddies to further their private interests and giving preferential treatment to people based on the buddies who represent them is illegal, regardless of whether or not money changed hands, and the member demanded to know what were the consequences for this activity. I wonder who said that, Mr. Speaker. Well, ironically, it was the Minister of Intergovernmental and Northern Affairs and Internal Trade who said that. So I'd like to know from the Prime Minister, does he agree with the 2010 opposition member from Beausejour that the current member from Beausejour should be sanctioned?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that we have a strong system and a commissioner that oversees on ethics and conflict of interest to ensure that all Canadians can have confidence in public office holders and indeed every member of Parliament. We ensure that we work with the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner, that we follow their rules and that we make amends whenever they bring forward concerns. That's what we will continue to do, and we thank the ethics and conflict of interest commissioner for his hard work.
The Honourable Member for Milton. Order.
Very glad that the Prime Minister mentioned the Ethics Commissioner, because he said this week: I would really like to have the power to express a point of view as to the gravity of the contravention when we find a contravention and what kind of sanctions should be taken. It's important to know that there will be consequences if you don't respect something. Prime Minister said that we will move forward in the ways the Ethics Commissioner recommends. I see what the Ethics Commissioner is recommending. Will the Prime Minister take the Ethics Commissioner clear recommendation and determine sanctions against this minister?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has among the strongest ethics rules in the world for applying to members of Parliament, and we're always looking forward to do more. We know that the trust that people have in their institutions and government is the foundation of democracy, one that is shaky in some places in the world, not one that is shaky in Canada. But we always are willing to do more. We look forward to working with all parties in this House to look at how we can continue to bolster the confidence of Canadians in the excellence of these institutions we serve.
Député de Charlebourg, Haute-Saint.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal summer of failure continues. Between June of 2017 and 2018, the RCMP intercepted some 26,000 illegal migrants. 56% of them had a non-immigrant U.S. visa. 65% had legal status in the U.S. In addition, nearly 2,000 of those illegal immigrants are U.S. citizens. Does the Prime Minister and his team not realize that under his leadership people are flouting the law? We have a plan. What is theirs? What is the Prime Minister waiting for to resolve this problem? Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge the challenge stemming from the fact that people are irregularly crossing our border. We can reassure Canadians that security screening is done and that the immigration process and refugee process is being applied to all people entering the country, whether they are irregular or not. We are fortunate to live in a country which is open and positive when it comes to immigration, and that is something that we are going to continue to defend by ensuring Canadians that we have a system that works. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to the Prime Minister to go to the U.S. side to read the billboard that says that it's illegal to cross the border that way. And I'd like to point out that 2,000 people crossed the border. They were illegal, but they're already American citizens. 16,000 of them have legal status in the United States. And we know that there are illegal migrants who are buying airplane tickets to cross the border. Why is the Prime Minister waiting so long to resolve this problem that has existed since his famous tweet? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are working with the U.S. administration to advance files that are important to Canadians, including border issues. We have obligations, international obligations, to analyze the files and applications for all people who cross the border. This is an obligation we have, and something that over generations has, in fact, immigration added to and contributed to Canada and to its culture. We are proud to have done so. We'll continue to protect our immigration system.
Hill.
Mr. Speaker, 65% of the people who have illegally crossed the border into Canada and claimed asylum already had legal status in the United States, one of the safest democratic places in the world. Think about that for a second. In UNHCR camps, instead of prioritizing genocide survivors being reunited with their families, he's doing this. How can he possibly think this is fair?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are responding in an appropriate and measured way with extra investments to ensure that we continue to apply in its integrity our immigration and refugee system. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives enjoy criticizing and drumming up fears and anxiety, but they have no plans other than perhaps to militarize our entire border. These will not work, Mr. Speaker. We are applying our immigration system in a responsible way. We are ensuring that it remains fair. We are ensuring that Canadians remain confident in the strength of our immigration system because they can and should be.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
It is not fair to prioritize people who have legal status in upstate New York over the reunion of a family member of a genocide survivor. That is not fair. It is not fair, Mr. Speaker, to call the fears of Canadians that our immigration system is no longer sustainable. That is not fair, Mr. Speaker, and that lies on the hands of this Prime Minister. When will he close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Conservatives are putting forward criticisms without having any idea how they would actually fix this problem. We know how to fix this problem. We are working with stakeholders in the United States and around the world to remind them that there are no shortcuts to becoming a Canadian, that crossing irregularly or illegally does not get you into permanent status any quicker than any other way. This is something that is important to emphasize. The Conservatives are striking out trying to create divisions and fear, but they have no plan to handle things differently.
Honorable Deputy Salaberry-sur.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Yesterday, the answer by the Minister of Finance to my colleague for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie was completely off track. Elected representatives from Vaudreuil-Soulanges have been demanding answers of the NEB for 2 years on the Enbridge 9B pipeline. According to an excerpt from the letter that they received, and I quote, the NEB is obliged to put an end to the possibility of following up with the RCM. In other words, we don't like your questions, so we're not going to answer. People are entitled to answers. Does the Prime Minister find it normal for the NEB to be promoting the oil industry instead of citizens? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, there are people in this country, including members of the NDP, who believe that there's a choice that needs to be made between jobs and protecting the environment. We know that the only way to build a strong country in the future is to protect the environment while creating economic growth. That is why we are consulting. That is why we are working with Indigenous peoples, with communities. We are investing in environmental sciences in order to ensure that the decisions we make on the development of our economy protect the environment at the same time. This is something we take seriously, and we will always take seriously.
Patrie.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-le-Petit-Patrie. In Quebec, the environment is a priority for people, and there's a true sense of urgency. But here, the Liberals are talking out of both sides of their mouths. Who says that? David Suzuki. From ordinary citizens right up to scientists, everyone is seeing Liberal duplicity. Suzuki even said that if the Minister of the Environment were honest, she would resign instead of defending the Liberal government. Does the Prime Minister think that buying a $4.5 billion pipeline using our money is a good way to fight climate change? Is that what he believes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again, we can see that the NDP is claiming that there is a choice that must be made between the environment and what's good for the economy. We know that Canadians know that the only way to build a secure future for our children is to protect the environment, to fight climate change, and to invest in good jobs and a stronger future for our young people and for our communities. Doing those two together is something that the NDP doesn't understand how to do. That is why we will continue to take action, respectful action. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. And Mr. Speaker, the U.S. administration cut taxes which changed the competitive nature of the situation. But on this side of the border, the government hasn't done anything. There's a study that concluded that since the government hasn't done anything, some 635,000 jobs are at stake, a huge amount in the economy, and that's why John Manley, from the head of the conference board, has said that the government needs to have a plan to enhance competitiveness. Will the Prime Minister follow the advice of John Manley, who in passing used to be a Deputy Prime Minister, a Liberal Deputy Prime Minister? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we're very aware of the fact that we need to be competitive. Our businesses need to be competitive. That's why we are cutting taxes for small and medium-sized businesses across the country. We dropped them on January 1st. We will continue to reduce those taxes in January. And we are looking at ways of remaining competitive with the United States by looking at investments in competitiveness for our businesses. And so we are not going to do what the Conservatives are proposing and don't understand.
The Prime Minister's unprovoked and inaccurate partisan attack against Conservatives on NAFTA today confirms again that his election strategy is to strut around pretending to stand up to Donald Trump. Ironic, though, because his increases in taxes and his heavy regulation have led Canadian dollars to head right down south to Donald Trump's America, where Canadian investment is up 2/3 and U.S. investment in Canada is down by half. So will the Prime Minister stop all the drama on NAFTA and stop sending our money and jobs south of the border?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite wants to clarify things, he can immediately say that he disagrees with Stephen Harper's analysis that it would be better to sign a bad deal than to have no deal, because that's what Stephen Harper is on record as having recommended to Canadian parliamentarians and to Canadian negotiators. If he disagrees with Stephen Harper on that position or on any other position, please let him say so and set the record straight.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
What I disagree with is this Prime Minister's agenda, which is sending money, business, and cheap oil into the arms of Donald Trump. His higher taxes have sent money south. He blocked a pipeline to the Atlantic and another to the Pacific, which means we have to pump cheap oil into the United States. And he gave $4 billion to a Texas oil company, which is building pipelines with Canadian tax dollars in Donald Trump. So, Mr. Speaker, again, will the Prime Minister stop the drama and stop sending our jobs, oil, and money down south?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite agrees with Stephen Harper that it is better to sign a bad deal than to have no deal. Well, we disagree and Canadians disagree. On the issue of getting our resources to new markets, we understand how important it is. And their failure for 10 years to get a pipeline built that will get our resources in a significant way to new markets is on them. We know that the way to get these things built properly is to work with Indigenous peoples and to make sure you're protecting the environment. That's what Canadians asked us to do. That's what we will be doing.
Honourable member for Carleton. Order.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister personally intervened to veto a pipeline to the Pacific. Then he regulated to death another pipeline to the Atlantic. That means we have to send billions of dollars in discounted oil to Donald Trump's America. He then raised taxes on businesses, which has led Canadian investment in the U.S. to go up 2/3, while American investment in Canada is down by half. He then gave $4 billion to a Texas oil company to build pipelines down south. With enemies like that, Donald Trump doesn't need friends, Mr. Speaker.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there is just too much wrong with the previous member's statement to go through it, but I will address the question of Energy East. Mr. Speaker, a private company made a determination that they no longer wanted to move forward with a project where oil was at half the price of what it had been when they initially proposed that project. It actually never reached a point where we could have weighed in on it one way or another because they withdrew the project because they also had another pipeline going south that they had trouble filling the space on. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, this was a market decision by a private company, but the member opposite doesn't really know anything about that, does he?
Order. The honourable member. Order. The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
This summer I met Petra Schultz, an Edmonton mother who lost her son to an opioid overdose. She described the devastating impact this tragedy had on her family and many like hers. Today, we learned that over 1,000 Canadians lost their lives to opioid overdoses in the first 3 months of 2018, a 5% increase over 2017 and a 44% jump over 2016. Mr. Speaker, opioid deaths have increased every single year of this government's mandate. Will the Prime Minister admit his approach is failing and tell this House what he'll do to reverse this deadly epidemic?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, we are deeply concerned about the opioid crisis in Canada. Between January 2016 and March 2018, approximately 8,000 Canadians tragically lost their lives to apparent opioid-related overdoses. We have responded with new federal investments, new legislation, and regulatory action, such as $231.4 million in investments to improve access to treatment, to address stigma, and to gather more data to help address the opioid crisis. We know, Mr. Speaker, there is much more work to do, but we will not treat this as a criminal issue. We will work with our partners to increase access to treatment.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, the 15 weeks of EI sick leave are unfair. Joanne, one of our fellow citizens, had to go back to work while she was still sick, only 3 months after a very serious breast cancer case. What happens when people go back to work sick? They relapse. Joanne and her family lost everything, their home and their life savings. And what are the Liberals doing? Nothing. Hundreds of thousands of people need more than 15 weeks to get better. So when will this government finally act? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it is always difficult to hear stories of Canadians who are ill, and we are doing everything we can to help them. We have taken concrete commitments in order to improve the EI system to ensure that it responds better to the needs of Canadians. We have put in place the new caregivers benefit. We have made the EI rules more flexible, and we have speeded up the application process so that Canadians can get benefits more rapidly. There is always more to do, and we are working with Canadian families to help them even more.
St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, the economic, cultural, and ecological importance of our oceans to Atlantic Canadians cannot be overstated. And as depicted in Robert Chaffe's play Between Breaths, the goals of working the sea and protecting our country's endangered whales are both vitally important to us. Can the Prime Minister confirm that our government's significant measures to protect the North Atlantic right whale have balanced the protection of this iconic species with the health of Atlantic Canada's fisheries?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I thank the member from St. John's East for his question. We've put in place the necessary measures to protect this iconic species and to ensure continued access to our fisheries. Since taking clear and coordinated action, I'm happy to report that thus far we have not had a single reported death of a North Atlantic right whale in Canadian waters. I also want to thank industry leaders who cooperated with our measures, but I am glad that our snow crab and lobster fishers have also enjoyed good fishing seasons.
Honourable member for Banff Airdrie.
Mr. Speaker, when knocking on doors in my riding this summer, I kept hearing frustration. Frustration at this Prime Minister's continual failures. His failure to build a pipeline. His failure to support Canadian oil and instead importing it from countries like Saudi Arabia. His failure to keep jobs in Canada. His failure to support small businesses and instead over-regulating and over-taxing them, putting some of them right out of business. Does the Prime Minister understand that his failures are costing Canadians their livelihoods, and does he even care?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only do we care about Canadians, but we've invested concretely in making their lives better. We're talking about 500,000 new full-time jobs since we took office. We're talking about the lowest unemployment rate in 40 years. We're talking about investments that have lifted hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty. We have lowered taxes for small businesses. We are drawing in global investment. We are delivering on the highest growth in the G7 last year. This is what Canadians expected. This is what we are delivering for the middle class and those working hard to do it.
Order. The Honourable member for Lakeland.
But not for middle-class oil and gas workers. 1.2 million barrels a day are flowing through new pipelines approved and built under Conservatives, which will be 2 million when Keystone XL is done. No tax dollars needed. As of today, the Liberals have added 0 after 3 years in government and blew 4.5 billion tax dollars that will go into the U.S. And every time the Prime Minister points to the past and blames others, he admits he failed, and they still have no plan for the future. Their summer of failure is becoming their legacy of failure, and it's hurting the whole country. When will he pull his ban on pipelines, Bill C-69, and give a plan for Trans Mountain?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just to correct the record a little bit, as a government, we have expanded export capacity for the Alberta Clipper project. We approved the Nova Gas Pipeline, the Line 3 replacement project, the Arnold Apatite Mine, wood fiber LNG, the Ridley Island propane terminal. We are moving forward on getting projects done and getting them done the right way, which both respects Indigenous peoples and works in partnership with them. We are working to make sure that the environmental science and protection of our ecosystems is front of mind. We know that 10 years of failure by the Conservatives because of narrowing the scope of projects needs instead to restore confidence of Canadians.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
What about Trans Mountain? And for the last 2 years, they said over and over that their plan would have shovels in the ground by now. The Prime Minister himself said, quote, our government has completed the deepest consultations with rights holders ever on a major project in this country. He claimed their process brought in, quote, Indigenous communities, respects science, and gets the social relations. Well, the court clearly ruled he failed, and failed. And today, there is no Trans Mountain expansion, and it's been 20 days without a plan. So why should Canadians believe any word he ever says?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
See, here's the difficulty, Mr. Speaker, for Conservatives. They've actually spent the past 3 years telling us we shouldn't be doing so much on the environment. We shouldn't be fretting about consultation with Indigenous peoples. We should just plow ahead like Stephen Harper did. Well, he didn't succeed in 10 years of trying to plow ahead. And what we've heard from the court recently was that it was good that we were doing consultations and working with Indigenous people. It's good that we were taking seriously the science, but we need to do a little more. That leaves the Conservatives on the wrong side of history, and we are going to do things the right way.
The honourable member for Foothills.
When asked about the job losses in the energy sector, a direct result of Liberal failure on pipeline like Trans Mountain, the Liberals' response is to take credit for jobs at Amazon. Are they trying to say that the thousands of highly skilled professionals, welders, pipe fitters, engineers, who have lost jobs across Canada should find work at an Amazon warehouse? Another 8,000 Canadians are unemployed because of the Prime Minister's summer of failure. Wow. What is the Prime Minister's plan to get these experienced professionals back to work, I don't know, in the energy sector?
Right, honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what folks in the energy sector understand very clearly is there is no path forward for our energy sector unless we also protect the environment, unless we build partnerships with Indigenous peoples. The old ways of doing things failed for 10 years under Conservatives. We now know that being respectful and thoughtful about how we move forward is what Canadians expect. That is exactly what we are going to do. While they are still worried about suddenly putting a price on pollution, we know that moving forward responsibly is the only way to get things done in this country.
Honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, recently I heard from Stefan, a veteran from my riding diagnosed with PTSD while serving in the Canadian Navy for 28 years. Counseling, medication, and therapy weren't working for him. It wasn't until he got his service dog, Sarge, that he could finally get out of the house, go for a walk, and talk to people. Sarge saved his life. The long-awaited Laval University study states that service dogs, like Sarge, save veterans' lives. Yet the Liberals continue to deny veterans and their families the funding they need. Why is this government stalling in providing the funding required for life-saving service dogs for veterans?
Right, honourable Prime Minister.
As people have seen from investments of close to $10 billion in our veterans over the past 3 years, the mental health and well-being of veterans and families is a priority for this government. We've heard from veterans, the veterans community, that this is an important issue to them. So in Budget 2018, we expanded the medical expense tax credit for recognizing costs for psychiatric service dogs for 2018 and future years. And being based in evidence is important to us, so we're currently funding 3 research initiatives related to service animals. We continue to monitor the research to ensure that we're making the best decisions to support our veterans.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, for over a year, my office has been helping a mother whose son is in the military. Her son has PTSD and tragically is also suicidal. And despite his serious injury and critical situation, he's been forced to wait for almost a year for his medical claim to be processed by Veterans Affairs. He feels his government has abandoned him, and there are 7 others in his unit who feel the same. When will this government keep its promise to our veterans and get them the help that they so desperately need?
Right, honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, this government recognizes that we have a sacred obligation to support our veterans and their families, and that includes investments in mental health. We have invested over the past 3 years about $10 billion in helping our veterans, in supporting their families, in moving forward on veterans' mental health benefits and supports, in reopening shuttered Veterans Affairs offices, but we recognize there is still more to do. We are working hard to meet the expectations and the needs of the veterans who've served this country so excellently for so many years. We will continue to be there for them, and I thank the member for her question.
Honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government's policies have once again failed our military. Canada needs effective equipment and highly trained personnel to maintain our defence obligations, but reports say that our military has a shortage of 275 pilots. As a former Air Force officer, I know that pilots do not want to fly 40-year-old used Australian F-18 fighter jets. Those planes are older than our current ones. Will this Prime Minister start supporting our military to attract and retain the pilots we need and finally cancel the interim purchase of these used fighter jets?
Order. Right, honourable Prime Minister.
As the member well knows, after a decade of Conservative cuts, we are proud that our government is making landmark investments in the Canadian Armed Forces. There has never been a better time for Canadians to join Canada's defence team. We're taking action to boost retention of our women and men in uniform, including with tax breaks and with more than $6 million a year for support and services for military families. We've introduced initiatives to speed up recruitment and training to ensure our Royal Canadian Air Force has all it needs to accomplish its mission.
The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, the Prime Minister has had 3 years, and his only solution is to spend $500 million on a pile of scrap metal from Australia. The Prime Minister just doesn't understand the consequences of his failures. Now, this report confirms that the Royal Canadian Air Force is short 275 pilots. And why are they leaving? Because nobody wants to fly a bunch of old, rusted-out fighter jets from Australia. When will the Prime Minister cancel this asinine interim policy of buying used jets, recruit and train new pilots, and finally stop failing our troops?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know I'm not the only one in this House that finds it a little bit rich that the Conservatives are complaining about procurement processes when they completely botched our fighter jet procurement process from the beginning. They completely failed to get the equipment needed to our armed forces. They created the capability gap. We are fixing that. We are ensuring that the men and women in uniform who serve this country are used to given the equipment they need and not just used for photo ops like the Conservatives did every damn time.
The honourable member for Brantford Brant.
The Prime Minister has failed to give injured veterans the support they have earned. Remember, the Prime Minister has told veterans that they are asking for too much. Yet these Liberals are giving a man convicted of murdering a police officer, a man who is not a veteran himself, money meant for veterans. He killed her, put her body in a compost bin, and dumped her under a bridge. When will the Prime Minister step in and stop this outrageous abuse of veterans' benefits?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Here's something that we saw for 10 years the Conservative government did not acknowledge. When a man or woman serves in Canada's armed forces or in the RCMP, their whole family serves with them. We have made it a priority to not only improve benefits and services for our nation's veterans, but for their families as well. Since 2016, investments have totaled $10 billion for veterans programs and services, including the hiring of over 470 staff to increase delivery capacity. In regards to the tragic and terrible case the member opposite mentioned, due to laws around privacy and confidentiality.
The honourable member for Scarborough Agincourt.
Mr. Speaker, our government understands the importance of fostering a culture of curiosity among our kids and youth. Today is the Prime Minister's Science Fair, which highlights both our outstanding students and science centres across Canada. I am extremely excited to see all of the amazing projects that the students have brought for us today. Can the Prime Minister please explain to this House the benefits of getting our youth interested in science?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Scarborough Agincourt for her work on her file and her question. We are delivering on our promise to restore science to its rightful place in Canada. We are strengthening Canada's labs and classrooms with the largest investment in fundamental research in Canada's history. I'm looking forward to seeing the amazing work of our youngest researchers and scientists later today and invite everyone to come join. Unlike the Harper Conservatives, we celebrate, promote, and believe in science-based decision-making.
The honourable member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, The Prime Minister doesn't seem to understand why the dairy producers from across Canada are here on the Hill. Does he even know why the next generation of producers protested in front of his office this summer? Well, I can tell him why. Because they don't believe him. He plays with words. He hasn't told them about his real intentions with regard to supply management. Will he finally tell the truth? Or once again, is he going to add another failure to his list of summer failures? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would like to thank the Conservative member for defending supply management. I note it is not unanimous on their side of their House. So I know that on this side, we all agree that supply management is a priority for our government and for Canadians. We're going to continue to protect supply management and to support our farm producers, especially our dairy producers. They do excellent work every single day to deliver a clean, high-quality product to Canadians. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, the last Genie ceremony recalled the work of a number of generations of Quebecers to put culture on our screens, but the problem is that is now in danger. Our young people are growing up with Netflix and YouTube, multinationals that couldn't care less about our language and culture. The former Heritage Minister spent 3 years saying it was time to act, but then she did nothing. Does the new Minister of Heritage, will he let the Minister of Heritage do his work and intervene before the next elections? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that it is important to protect culture in Quebec and across Canada, and that is why that we invested historic amounts to restore funding to Radio-Canada CBC. We doubled funding for the Canada Council of the Arts, and we are going to continue to invest and to defend our cultural industries because we know that it is good for our identity, but it is also good for jobs and the economy. I trust our Minister of Heritage, and I know that he's going to continue his excellent work. The Honourable Member for Saint Jean. To ensure the safety of Canadians, we have to cope with instability across the globe. In November, we announced a series of commitments with a view to optimizing Canada's impact and to allow it to be as useful as possible within UN efforts. In March, we announced that we were intending to deploy an operational air task force in Mali for a period of 1 year. Can the Prime Minister please update us on this peacekeeping operations in Mali? Thank you. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Saint Jean for his question and for his work. After a decade of darkness under the Conservatives, we are getting involved again in peacekeeping in Mali. In August, we attained our full operational capacity in Mali. Our armed forces are working closely with UN forces, and they are providing a medevac service 24/7, which is saving lives. I'd like to thank our brave men and women in uniform for the unbelievable work that they do every day. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after the terrible fire that destroyed the Voltigeur de Québec Armory, we, the Conservatives, spared no effort to restore this gem of Quebec heritage. But after their lamentable summer of failure, 2 experts confirmed today that the Liberals are attacking the integrity of the Quebec Citadel with non-compliant, lesser-quality American stone. It is still a time for them to undo this insult by using the original stone. So what is the Prime Minister waiting for to take our heritage seriously? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we care about the historical heritage of Quebec City, especially that of the Old City and its UNESCO status, and we are protecting it. The bidder must respect the guidelines to ensure that the UNESCO status is adhered to. And the department is going to do due diligence because we understand how important it is for the city. The Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Mr. Speaker, in Quebec, in the midst of the election campaign, all 4 party leaders presented a united front on supply management. It's a national priority. The 4 leaders are calling on the Canadian government to protect supply management in its entirety. Will the Canadian government agree with the Quebec consensus and commit to protecting supply management in its entirety, or will it decide to listen to the Conservatives' main advisor, Brian Mulroney, who wants to open yet another gap in supply management? Why does he never say in its entirety? The Right Honourable Prime Minister, as I have said many times in this House, and as I have told the farmers and dairy producers in Canada, we are going to protect supply management. We know that Americans want us to eliminate this system that works for Canadians and that works for our farmers and dairy producers, and we're going to continue to defend the supply management system that works.
Point of order.
Mr. Speaker, it was brought to my attention that an outburst of enthusiasm. I may have used a word that was unparliamentary. I withdraw that word and apologize to anyone who was offended.
I thank the Right Honourable Prime Minister for his apology.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, I have a point of order. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent of the House for the following motion.
The government to put the complete abolition of the system of supply management on the negotiating table in order to facilitate a new NAFTA agreement with our American partners and bring down the prices of milk, poultry and eggs for Canadian consumers. Yes?
Does the honourable member have unanimous consent of the House to move the motion? No, there is no consent. Order is, tabling of documents.